let me just give you a bit of context for the webinar today, because I don't think in my lifetime there's ever been such a disruption to the world of work, which you can look at in one sense and say, oh my goodness, you know, threat. But as we know, we can also look at it as an amazing opportunity. There's no doubt there's massive economic volatility. We've got some really big global sustainability conversations happening. In fact, the UK, I think, is hosting COP in, is it October or November? We've got some serious social justice issues that are impacting on companies, not just outside of companies. We've got the whole development of new ways of working, which, depending on which company you're part of, is called hybrid, agile, smart, whatever the words are that trip off the tongue, but all about how do we now work in companies and in organizations. And alongside of that, there's definitely been the continued erosion of trust in not just societal issues, but also in positions. And so kind of even being a leader now is sort of challenged and can be seen as a threat. And also then there's been some serious shifts in knowledge and skills. And there's no doubt that tech is playing a bigger part in really replacing traditionally lower skilled roles. So with all of that going on, I said to Gharry and Christina and Dom, I'd love us to just jump on a webinar, have a really honest, open conversation about what is required from leadership as we go into more of the 2020s, because there is an opportunity to plot a future that is unlike the past. And I know that can sound a bit cliche, but I really feel like there's a moment here of like a renaissance within the world of work that maybe in 20 years, 50 years time, people say, wow, those 2020s were so disruptive. And so there was a real sense of newness and different opportunities and innovation that led to where they are in that day. So that's kind of, I'm giving that as a big backdrop. And now I want to bring it right down into the world of work and into what many of you who be listening, the kind of situations you're in and you're involved with. So I guess at the start, I want to be upfront with you that we believe emotional intelligence is really, really important for leaders. And so I kind of want to start there with all of you, if that's all right, and go, I'm going to go to Christina first and go, Christina, do you think emotional intelligence is important to leadership? And if so, what do you think it is?
Yeah, massively. And I think just what you've described then as, it's even more so, it's becoming more and more so important, the ability to recognize your own emotions and those of others, and really connecting those to what people in our workplaces are kind of going through right now. The change of the workplace has just been phenomenal over the last year. And so the ability of leaders to continue to connect with their people and change the way they connect with their people is a real skill. And for us, it's certainly one that over, I suppose, the last 5 years or so, we've been really focusing on how we develop our leaders in emotional intelligence, because we've got some fantastic, what would I would call them technical leaders. But actually, connecting them to the sort of person and the people leadership piece is really, really important. And so that's been a real journey for a lot of our leaders, and they've been thrown into the fire over the last year. I think it's hugely important, and not everyone has that skill either.
Yeah, definitely. Gharry, talk to us about emotional intelligence for you, and then also within Nestle.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we've had to turbocharge our emotional intelligence. I saw this quote and I really like it, that it's about your ability to read the room. And I think when we're not physically in the room, it's more difficult to pick up all of those cues. I think it's the innate sense that we have, and it's a sense of what's going on beneath just the surface level conversations that are happening, to really understand how people really feel about a situation. And that comes with lots of, it comes with facial expressions, it comes with body, but it comes from knowing the person deeply. I think we've had to work harder at it during the last 12 months, because I think we're better in 3D generally as people. And this has been really hard. So yeah, we've been working harder to really understand how do people truly feel beyond the words, and giving them opportunities to do that. And we did partner with Impulse, and that's not a plug, Matt, but it is that you need to get feedback. You need to really understand that where people are, just how do they feel? Do they feel anxious? Yeah. Not just what they say, but what's the sentiment beneath that? What's beneath the kind of the waterline? So I like the idea of just kind of being able to read the room and understand what's going on beneath what people say.
Yeah. I've certainly seen with our organisation that with the the new remoteness of working, our leaders in some senses have become much more visible and more exposed, and you're starting to see, I think we talked about this in the last webinar, starting to see much more around that them as an individual. And so I suppose we shouldn't underestimate the journey that they've gone through in order that they're truly probably exposed in a way, because the only way we've been able to connect with people is through individual conversation and visible, sort of more visible than they may not necessarily have even been beforehand.
Yeah. And I think what's a really powerful point for people listening, and great to see so many on, is to understand that both Gharry and Christina work with people who years ago, I'm talking only a couple of years ago, people would say to me, they don't want to share their emotions. They work in factories, they work up poles and down holes and on building sites. So just talk to me, the two of you, and then Dom, I'm going to bring you in a moment, but just talk to me about that, because that's sometimes what gets thrown at us as Impulse. What you measure emotion? Oh gosh, they won't share that. So tell me, what have you? Because you both work, with people who might be seen traditionally not wanting to share those things, but you're both saying to me that's become more important than ever. I'll go to Christina first.
Yeah. So we did recognise this a number of years ago, because we're predominantly quite a masculine sector in construction, so sort of traditional ways of working is very sort of hierarchical, and again very very work focused, and not really particularly interested in the individual, bringing the individual to work. So we were finding that we had I suppose quite a hard culture, and we needed to be able to soften that in some way. And the way to do that was to really get our leadership to actually understand that there are better ways to getting more out of people. And so I think we have been on a journey. So I mentioned that we've integrated this into a lot of our emotional intelligence, into a lot of our leadership programs. So yeah, I would say our organisation, on the back of having worked in emotional intelligence, and then also this sort of turbocharge of COVID, has really transformed the sector for the better, absolutely for the better.
I love that line. I'm going to come to Gharry. I love that line of there's a better way to lead people, and I think that's why we're having this conversation today, because as we go on, we'll start to unpick this and really get into it. How is it better, and what's the difference? But Gharry, just talk to me again. You run factories. People in factories, surely they wouldn't want to share their emotions, and we wouldn't care whether you cared too much about that.
Yeah, I think as individuals, as human beings, we all want to be heard, and we all want to be recognised. We all want to be valued. So we've got energy-saving lights in the office, and that if I don't move around, the lights go off. So people want to be valued and recognised for who they are. I think over the last 2 years, we've been on a much more accelerated journey on mental well-being, and I think that's really helped people be able to signpost help, but also to be able to talk about it. We have mental health first aiders, as lots of businesses have. So I think the opportunity to be able to express themselves now is becoming more easy. It's not easy, it's becoming easier, because we've got a culture of mental health and well-being. And I think in the past we've always looked at trying to help people when they got to a crisis point, and now we're trying to how do you stay mentally healthy? And I think we have to go deeper in order to do that. And I think even in our, even in some of our more, less touchy-feely areas like the factory, they're kind of very, our response rates to our engagement survey are pretty high. People, when they know, because I think the key is you've got to have follow through.
Yeah.
So you can't just ask people how they're feeling and not do anything about it.
Yeah.
You have to go back and communicate, tell them what you've heard, tell them the 2 or 3 things you're going to do as a result, and then they need to see tangible results. Otherwise, people are not going to engage the next time you ask them. Because why bother?
Yeah, definitely. And Dom, just talk very briefly about the journey. We've been on over. I think that even the last 5-6 years, from people not being interested in impulse and emotions, like what we talk to, and actually even with the coaching. Just share what you've seen in that change.
Well, I think the biggest shift, and we've heard it from Christina and Gharry as well, is that now more and more leaders want to work with emotions, whereas I think 5 or 6 years ago they wanted to work despite emotions. I think that the difference is more and more people thought 5 or 6 years ago, I want to get stuff done, and emotions are an impediment potentially to me, so I want to minimize their impact. Now I think more leaders are saying emotions are crucial for helping me get that stuff done. I need to harness them and help people express them and use them effectively. And it all goes back really to people recognizing that in order to make a decision that they're going to stick to, people of course need the logic, but they also need to have some emotional attachment, and leaders are the most powerful way of doing that.
Definitely. They definitely, I think people now more so than ever want to feel connected and feel they belong to an organisation and that they're cared for as well. And care and construction wasn't generally something that went together again 5 odd years ago. But we're working in a competitive world, attraction, skills attraction. So we need to be competitive, and hence we need our people to be advocates of our organisation, our brand, and and for that to happen, it needs to be led well by emotional intelligent leaders.
Go back briefly to what Gharry was saying as well. In order to do that, the people who do that most are the leaders, because they are now the contact point that many people, particularly if they're working remotely, have with the organisation. So it's even more important than ever, I think, that the leaders reflect those behaviours.
Definitely. And for those who know anything about the impulse journey, one of the kind of the books that really inspired me and was kind of like the Bible in terms of some of the conversation we're having today about emotional intelligence is Daniel Goleman. And I just wanted to read this because I think this is just so key. He says, the foremost role of a leader remains driving the collective emotions in a positive direction and clearing the smog created by toxic emotions. This task applies to leadership everywhere, from the boardroom to the shop floor. And I just love that, driving emotions in a positive direction, because where you keep people excited, hopeful, curious, passionate, it's amazing what you can achieve, as opposed to clearing the smog created by toxic emotions. I'd love to hear from all of you. Have you been in a situation? Let's go negative first, and we'll go positive. Where you because we're talking about this, and is it real? Is it tangible? What's the impact of being, and have you been in a situation where there's been toxic emotions and actually often led by the leader? Anyone want to share?
Do you want me to go first? I'll go. So there is, I think when people are under pressure, you've got to give people a little bit of slack. When people are under pressure, and they can be under real pressure, they may not necessarily always behave in the right way, and that happens, and you manage it. But I have had incidences where we've had a leader not happy, banging the table, pointing, that kind of almost sort of slightly aggressive, but ultimately it's coming from a good place. But the impact that has on the room and the team, and having that sort of people sort of fearing to speak or provide feedback, I don't think that's ever what that leader will have intended through that action. But by doing that, it kind of you ultimately people sort of revert and just don't speak, and then you then don't get that sort of positive conversation conflict that actually comes up, that helps you come up with the best solution at the end of the day. So I think I have seen that, less so as I've gone through my career, thankfully.
Well, just on that, Christina, I think you make a really important point, and something I would encourage everyone listening to think about is working with leaders on impact intended, impact felt, and actually closing that gap. Because you're so right. We've worked with so many leaders, Dom and I, where they're like, yeah, but I meant this, and yeah, but my what I was trying to do was that, and we're like, okay, so you had an intention, but the impact felt or received was actually this, and we've got to close that gap, because what you're intending to do and actually what you're doing are two quite different things.
I had a just to finish off on that. I had a work with Amazon. I think you came to the session, Matt, actually, and that one of the snippets that I took away from the session with Amazon was that Jeff Bezos, obviously in a different role now, but he used to go into a room and just observe and not actually, just let the conversation flow and people, be able to have their say, and he'd always be the last person to speak. So it's almost like, as soon as the highest paid person in the room, Hippo effect, if someone says something, you all sort of follow suit. So it's about letting people have their voice, and I thought that was really positive.
Yeah. Has that ever happened to you, Gharry? Have you ever walked into the room and you've ended up being asked to say something first, and then you've watched everyone and you've not meant to, or have you ever been in a room where that's happened?
Yeah, I think the leader casts a big shadow, particularly in more structured organizations. I think perhaps in smaller organizations where the leader is perhaps first amongst equals, then it can be a bit more open. But yeah, conversations change when leaders come in. Leadership's lonely. And that's one of the things that you find, that your conversations change when you enter a room. But I think that, coming back to your point earlier on toxicity, I think there are some leaders that assume positive intent and some that don't. There are some that seek to elevate themselves by undermining others. And that's how they survive, by just casting doubt, putting blame somewhere else. I've seen one of the questions in the chat, and I'd love to talk about it later on, about psychological safety, because I think that's a huge enabler, And it's a thing that I've learned in my career, that actually if you create psychological safety in the workplace, that's the greatest accelerator of trust, creativity, curiosity. And yeah, so I think getting leaders that assume positive intent, and candidly, if you've got leaders that are not coachable on this, that have ingrained patterns, you need to get them off the bus. And my intention has always been to coach and mentor and help and develop people. But, sometimes you just got to call it a day and say, look,
so just very briefly, just because I do want to bring in, you're right, we're getting some really good interaction, so I'm going to bring in some questions and whatnot. But just really quickly, how long to all three of you, how long do you give that? So you've done some coaching, you've identified some of the issues, they've gone through the coach. How long do you give it before you call it?
3 months.
3 months for Gharry. Dom?
I was going to go for 6 months actually, but
yeah.
I don't know. I'm not going to actually answer that, because I actually think that every circumstance is different.
Yeah, but and I'm being a bit naughty, but behind it is this. I think this is one of the toughest questions for probably people even listening into this. At what point do you call it? And what I would say is my experience of corporate life is they always wait too long. Always wait too long. They let the toxicity continue. The impact of everyone going, why the hell, excuse my French, aren't the senior leaders looking at this and dealing with it?
I think it depends on what the organisation values as well. At the end of the day, if they absolutely are, want their sort of performance, as in, and if that person is performing, it's very, very difficult to challenge that, especially depending on where they are in the hierarchy as well.
But hopefully for those listening, it's shorter than maybe you thought they were there was a sort of 3-6 month range there. But look, I just want to bring in some of what I'm seeing on the chat and in a question, and great to see Gabby. I think you're totally right. They're saying about people judge others on their behaviors, but ourselves on intent. And my argument or my thought on that is always followship is sometimes harder than leadership, because we have to choose to put a good intent or to judge them on their intent rather than, you say, their behaviors, which we would want people to do with ourselves. Julie, thank you for the call out. It's actually something we're going to come to at the end, is books that the panelists are going to recommend, but great to see you're recommending Rebel Ideas. I've listened to the Blinkist, I think, on it, which is by Matthew Said. So very good. But I just want to cover, there's 2 questions. I want to get to Susie's first, because it's right where we are at the moment. I will come to psychological safety. Susie's asked, I'm interested to hear how the panel see EQ in creating a sense of belonging and fostering a truly inclusive culture. Who wants to pick that up first? How do the panel see EQ in creating a sense of belonging and fostering a truly inclusive culture?
Well, I kick off on that. I think, how do you foster an inclusive culture? First of all, you've got to understand what motivates the individuals in that team. And I think having a high EQ helps you tune into what's important to other people, to understand their responses and their emotions. So I think that's the first thing. I think secondly, having a high emotional intelligence allows leaders to spot when people are clearly not feeling safe for whatever reason. And a lot of people have a good front, but there are giveaways, there are tells about the way they behave. And I think leaders who have high EQ are able to do that as well. So I think that's absolutely crucial to make that shift. And those are some of the key reasons why.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dom. Anyone else want to pick up on that? Let's create a sense of belonging, foster inclusive culture.
Yeah, I think, well, just to echo what Dom's just said, I think for us, you know, we want to, again, coming back to the attraction piece and retaining people, we want to have a diverse and inclusive, you know, workforce. And I think that unless you have leaders that are interested in individuals and the people agenda, you're just not ever going to get there. It will just be words. So for me, it's incredibly important that, you know, when leaders have a sort of balance of priorities, and, you know, I would say so more than 50-60% that should be their people. And so yeah, it should go hand in hand.
Yeah, one of the things, Matt, if I may, on this one that we've learned, and we're working through this now, that we've been working on radical candor as a philosophy, that one of the axes of that is caring deeply. And, you know, high performing organizations have radical candor, and that you can challenge directly when you care deeply. You know, you move people into that learning zone, into the high performing zone, when you show that you really understand them beyond their work context and what they deliver at work. You know, I've been working with Nestle on the D&I agenda and being one of the champions on race, and really seeking first to understand where people are at culturally. You know, we're going through Ramadan. We've been working to try and build our education and our knowledge and our recruitment to show that we've got that deep understanding of the whole person. And we don't just want people to bring their whole selves to work. That's, you know, been a great guiding principle. I'd like people to bring their best selves to work. And actually, when you bring that diversity, I love the book that's been recommended, The Rebel Ideas. We need more diversity. We don't just need people that look a bit different or are a bit different, but people that think differently, because that's where we get the creativity. And we're going to need more creativity and vulnerability in order to solve more complex problems. And the world is more complex now than it was when I entered the workplace.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I think there's a lot in that. And again, just for those who are listening, I think understanding the impact of poor leadership, particularly a lack of emotional intelligence. I just got some things here, some stats. One is 60% of employees who left companies in 2019 did so because of issues with their leader. So 60%. And then what happens when people don't have EQ? You get a lack of engagement and morale, you get high turnover, you get a toxic culture that gets embedded, you get a lack of collaboration, minimal innovation, team chemistry is non-existent, communication tends to drop down, you get a rise in micromanagement, you end up having favorites or bullies can happen, and you get the most damaging of almost all of those I saw was wasted talent. The last one is that actually people who have this unbelievable potential in them, that part of being a leader, I think, is to help them to draw that out, can get lost. But there's a great question from Julie, just to finish this section off, and we are going to move to psychological safety, is accepting not everyone has the EQ gene, which is interesting in itself. And I'll let you see if you agree or disagree with that. Is it trainable? So all this conversation we've been having, can people go from actually being quite low EQ to quite high EQ?
I personally think so. I seen it through our leadership and development programs, and actually, you know, I think it's, for me, it's about them realizing it's something in the first place and unlocking that in the individual. And then once you understand, it's a bit of having that light bulb moment, really. They're like, oh, okay, you know, actually, yes, this is why, you know, it's important to have. And so they'll take more interest and care and understanding. I think it comes back to your earlier question, though, around the whole 3 to 6 months. If they don't want, some people just may not choose, or, you know, to buy into it. But I do think it's developable, certainly.
Super. Gary?
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is the great thing. Sometimes people can't change their attitude, but I think their skills, and EQ is one of the ones that you can build. Yeah. There is there are programs that help you recognize, be self-aware, recognize the signals, look at the behaviors that you can exhibit. But it has to start with a mindset, really. You can't change any of this unless you actually really want to do it.
Yeah.
Unless you really see the value in it. If you're just paying lip service because it's the next, you know, course that the company sent you on, or your boss has told you, that's not going to work. You have to really almost go back to first principles, which is you value people. You value the uniqueness and the authenticity of people, and you're prepared to invest that time. And maybe you're not a people manager. Maybe you're actually better as a project manager. You know, and that might be a good realization for you.
No, it's really good, Gary. You reminded me, Dom and I, when we're running coaching sessions with leaders, we often start by saying, how many books are you reading on leadership? How many podcasts are you listening to? What was the last YouTube video you watched? And unfortunately, I would say, Dom, majority haven't read one for years.
No, there's a moment when they start looking very interested at the floor, I think, at that point, many people. But I think the answer to your question is obviously, yes, it can be trained. Clearly, there are some people who are better equipped naturally to be more empathetic. They're better equipped to have a higher EQ, but everyone can develop it. And I think, building on what we've heard, there are 3 things that in our experience you can do to really help build EQ. The first is self-awareness. When we've talked about this, I think people need to be helped to understand how they respond, and then they're better equipped to manage that. I think the second you talked about is impact, because people don't necessarily understand the impact they're having, the detrimental impact they're potentially having of their behavior. And then the third, I think Christina mentioned this earlier, is about connection tools. So it's one thing to say you've got to connect with your teams, and leaders go, yeah, okay, how do I do that? And I think giving them tools and practice, we found anyway, some of the most important ways of helping them break any barriers that may exist.
And again, for those who've watched any webinars, you'll know we're big fans of Atomic Habits, which is about breaking it down into very small, bite-sizable chunks. So actually spend 2 minutes every day listening to someone, deeply listening. And I'm, honestly, it sounds so basic, but we've done this with leaders where we've just said, just 2 minutes every day that you wouldn't normally do, go and just start a conversation and just listen to what's going on. And it's amazing how those small steps then lead to the bigger ones. I think just to sum this up, and then we'll move on. Listening to all of you, there's no doubt there's something about actually self-leadership here that you've all sort of you've touched on that this EQ piece really requires the leader. And so I'm thinking of everyone listening and who's part of this conversation when they're going back to their organization saying, there is a thing of, am I willing to invest in myself, to develop myself, which starts with what's my awareness like and what's my ability to manage my emotions like. And then I think, you know, that's where it starts to build from. But I can really hear you all saying there's a definite requirement on the leaders, right, to be willing to do that. But the benefits are huge, and getting it wrong actually costs a huge amount. So I'm going to come back to, quite right, Nancy had a great question, which I think is all sort of part of this conversation about leaders over the 2020s and actually changing the culture of organizations, which is, how do we create psychological safety in our team? So Dom, I'm going to start with you and then go to the other panelists. What's our thoughts on that?
Well, I think the key thing is to build trust. So psychological safety is built on trust. If you feel safe because, you know, if you do something, you're not going to get judged on it, or it's not going to be held against you. And that's really about trusting. So leaders need to start by building trust. And the key way of doing that is is some sort of self-reflection, and then some sort of self-revelation, talking about themselves, about their emotions and their experiences. And often when we talk about this with leaders, you can see them becoming a bit uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be really, in fact, it probably shouldn't be too in depth about their innate feelings. It's more about how they've experienced things, what emotions they've had around them, and how they've dealt with those emotions. And, you know, we've worked with boards where just spending a half an hour when everyone around the table talks a bit about their home lives and some of the challenges they're facing with their families, perhaps, you can sense the atmosphere and it really builds those bonds. So I think the trust is the key thing for me, establishing that trust, so people feel as though they can say and do things and not be judged.
Yeah. Christina?
Yeah, so we do a lot of insights profiling in our organisation. So, but I think actually doing some analysis of the individuals in your team, actually really getting to helping them understand a little bit more about themselves and giving them some self-insight, and then also, you know, then how that comes together and how that makes a team, because, you know, we are all different and we all have different ways of working and preferences, and so to actually understand that can really be a, you know, massive unblocker for what could have been a, you know, a difficult relationship. Suddenly you can start to understand, well, actually, that's why we don't quite do things the same way, or but actually understanding that and understanding what the sort of team purpose and how you all come together, I think is really, really important. So I think having that bit of intel about one another in the team is really important, and that contributes to that trust that Don was talking about them.
Gharry?
Yeah, I think this is an area that leaders can play a massive role, really. I'm going to jump to the end, Matt. I know you said we're going to have a book plug. But this is the time. This is the book that I found really helpful, The Fearless Organization, about creating psychological safety in the workplace. And one of the things that I learned this before my current role, that actually it comes back to not the avoidance of fear, but the presence of something else. And actually what you really want is not the avoidance of fear. You want the presence of a learning and innovative, creative, growing business. And actually, if you want that, then you have to create an environment where people feel comfortable sharing their concerns, making mistakes. They're not frightened of being embarrassed. There's not going to be retribution. They're confident they can speak up in meetings. They're not going to be humiliated, put down, ignored, or blamed. And you can measure this. You can measure this, and you can get a team charter together. You know, the fact that members of this team, you know, we've been working together in my team on, you know, bring up the tough questions. Bring up the tough questions. We actively include people rather than exclude people that are different or think differently. Because we want to get to a different solution. It's safe to take risks. We built a learning culture. So I think it's both the psychological safety, but you almost need to go to the new ground. It's just actually you want a high-performing organization that's focused on learning, innovation. Most of the products in my industry, fast-moving consumer goods, 90% have been failed. 90% have been failed. That's a lot. That's a big failure rate. So
in other
what
words,
we need to do is,
most of the time you're going to be failing. The success is more the opposite. A couple of things. So just listening to you, Gharry, you really spark in my mind is when I remember about 2019, I think psychological safety really started to emerge. And by the way, great plug on the book, and we'll come back to it again. But I was going to say two things I remember is one is because it was a study, it wasn't like one of the universities did the study on this, and they basically found it needed everybody to speak up. Like you had to, and they said, I know this sounds, I remember listening to a podcast on it saying, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but for psychological safety to work within a team, you cannot sit there thinking or feeling something and not say it, because you're not helping create that environment where everyone starts to do that. But the second side is it fits to the first half of the conversation we've had, which is it requires a leader to manage their emotions and have high EQ, because as the things start to come out and people maybe initially don't are improving how they say things, it can feel like it's just a go at the leader. And so when we've helped some exec teams, we've really had to say, look, this is where your EQ matters so much, is that in those moments where there's psychological safety and people are able to have radical candor and talk very openly, you've got to manage your emotions and not see it as an attack, but see it as a learning or a growth, or there's an issue here that's outside of me. It's not about me. Any thoughts on that, anyone?
I've got two quick thoughts, and then I'll let somebody else talk. One is, I've learned not to make the person wrong.
Yeah.
We challenge the thinking, not the person.
Yeah, brilliant.
And the second is, again, a framework that I've been working with is giving feedback. Having an accepted framework for the whole company. That this is how we give feedback. It's what's inspiring or working. We always start with that. What's not working yet. And then for me, it might be working, but it's not working for me, or what's missing, and then what's possible. It's just really simple, but we've institutionalized that as a way of giving feedback in the organization. It's one that I learned in a different organization, but it's a great tool, and people know that's how I'm going to give feedback, and that's how we give feedback to each other. And we can do the bit of the radical candor, and then we stop badging it. When we stop badging it, oh, I'm going to be radically candid now. Actually, that's the first sign that you're on the right road, but you need to stop badging it and signposting it and just give it over time.
But I do agree. We would talk about having common language, like this is a radical candor moment, helps to begin with. And then you're right, it should drop off a bit, can't help at the beginning. Just Christina, for you, Philip, Alex, I will come to your comment in a moment, but Philip said, do you feel that some act like a boss, very directive, and act like they think they should be a leader, with a lack of confidence on how to actually be a people leader, and is not aware of how to lead and get the best out of their teams? So they've almost got this idea of what it is to be a leader,
absolutely loads of examples of that, where someone's been great at a role in the organization, and then because they're great, we automatically think, well, that means they're going to be a great leader. So that happens all the time, probably less so now, but I think the important thing is to make sure you're equipping those individuals. I do think with going back to the emotional intelligence piece though, I think some of our leaders almost don't, there's a bit around sort of the right to be there, and that sort of confidence piece can be quite a deep set thing that comes from sort of back from sort of childhood, etc. So some of these things can actually be quite difficult to shift, and they're so this whole sort of not good enough and should I be here and all those sort of inner demons can really impact leaders. So it is right to as people sort of progress through the organization to really support, put your arms around them to make sure we're equipping them in the right way, because again, you can be quite quick to judge as well, can't you? So, well, actually, they're not doing a very good job. But actually, what have we done as an organisation to really support and develop that individual? So, I think we've got a part to play in making sure our leaders are successful and that they really understand, and that we're selecting the right leaders as well, and putting the right people in place.
Yeah, it definitely feels like, I don't know if for you two. I mean, we get it. We see from across organisations, but definitely feels like we're in one of those disruptive periods where people are recognizing leadership needs to change. There's still some poor behaviors that need resolving, but we COVID and all that's happened has sped up some of those to go, that's those behaviors are just no longer going to work or be acceptable, and we do need to call them out now. Would that be fair? Can you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's starting to stand out like a sore thumb in our organisation when, and actually the more we ask for feedback, so using the surveys that we with yourselves and and just you can really see where leaders are starting to build diverse teams, where they've got really positive culture. It's come from that leader, and you see where it's not working. So absolutely, I think the more the organisation shifts, the more those individuals do stand out.
Yeah. And just for those again listening who don't know, Impulse employee engagement, and one of the things that makes us different is we ask two questions at the beginning of every single survey. How do you feel? It could be, how do you feel about working at Nestle or Balfour Beatty, and then why? And one of the things I raise that because one of what we're seeing, and particularly actually if you take Balfour, because you've been with us quite a number of years, is we are seeing that asking those questions does start to shift the climate and then ultimately the culture. Because leaders have to go back, and they've actually got data that says 56% of my people feel stressed, or they feel concerned, or whatever it might be, or they're excited, or they're hopeful, and they've got the why for that workload, well-being, whatever it might be. So there's no doubt, and we've seen this with your organization, Christina, that has helped shift where it's like, oh, the focus is on this, it's staying on this, and it's not leaving us. But I just want to ask, so on that note, Alex, let me just read out quickly. So it's a great comment. I've been involved in developing a new framework on this very subject. There's a number of points which need to be aligned: sense of purpose, valuing people. This is about working with and through others, building engagement, exerting positive influence, build a diverse workforce in which people's well-being is valued and they feel safe. It requires self-awareness, emotional intelligence, which we've talked about, to help others make sense of often complex and uncertain situations. Here's his question, or her question. Does the panel feel EQ is now more important than IQ? Gharry, I'll come to you first.
I think a mindset of growth is the most important thing. So I think you need to be growing. I mean, my challenge would be, if you're not growing in today's world as a leader, you're going to get left behind. The world's moving. There's so much ambiguity, there's so much disruption, and there's so much acceleration. And leaders today need to manage that tension. I don't think it's a binary one versus the other. You've got to deliver today, you've got to perform today, but you've got to transform for tomorrow. So that means you've got to have new capabilities for tomorrow. And some of them, probably most of them, are not going to come from yourself. They're going to come from your team. So you're going to need to engage the creativity, but you also have to say as a leader, I don't know. I really don't know how we're going to tackle this. And I think you need to do some of the things that you've talked about. So ramping up your vulnerability by saying you don't know, looking at the team strengths, looking at your individual strengths, being present. And then you've got to ask those questions. You've got to have that curiosity. I think somebody's labeled it appreciative inquiry. And then the humility to ask the right questions. I've learned as I've got older, it's not about having the solution. That the key is actually knowing what are the right questions to ask, which is the problem we need to solve. Solving the problem is not difficult. It's just asking the questions. Then you get the team aligned on a sense of purpose. And the thing that I've recognized recently is you need to think about the role of teams as a leader. Why do people come together in teams? We've found over the last 12 months, we can get our stuff done all merrily in our home offices, on Teams or Zoom. So we need to think about what is it that only the team can do together that they can't do alone. And that's the role of the leader, to get that shared purpose.
I think that's a great point again for those listening, that if you're not talking to your leaders already about why do we meet, what's the point of us being together, and challenging them on that. I'm a great fan of a spiritual guy called Thomas Merton, and he says, just think of your questions, he says, sometimes though we're asking questions of which the answers haven't yet been revealed. And I think there's something in that of allowing time. I totally take everyone's point that we've got to move fast, but I also think there's something about I love this word, cogitate, actually allowing some time just to let the answer be revealed, as opposed to having to do it there and then in that moment. But Christina, EQ, IQ, is there a...
I'm with Gharry. I don't think I have much to add, to be honest, in terms of what Gary's just said. I think he's exactly right. I think your point around time and allowing our people and our leaders that thinking space. I don't know how everyone else is feeling at the minute, but I'm sort of still back to back in Teams meetings. So to be able to really, think about and then translate into solutions some of the feedback that we get, it is incredibly difficult for leaders. So I think there is still some way to go in terms of getting this balance right in the current circumstance.
Which actually, Christina, raises also the point that in my personal experience in leadership, I do need time to reflect on why I was feeling the way I was feeling in certain meetings, whether it's with a client or my own team. And it's through that sort of just giving myself that, I go, that was what was going on. It's almost nothing to do with actually the situation. I either came in already bent out of shape, or there was a thought going on in my head that wasn't to do with even what the meeting was about. But it takes me sometimes, I've worked on it over the years, so I can do it fairly quickly now. But I really value that. Just often it's on an evening, I'll just sit down in my little chair here in my little office and just go, right, let's just go back and reflect and ponder and go, what's going on inside of me? And then you get to the root. Sorry, Gharry, you're going to say?
My best book for last year, can't remember if it was last year or the year before. Best book for 2 years ago, because it was really poignant, is Creating Space by Derek Draper, who poignantly is in a coma right now. He said that of all the generations that have ever lived, we're the only, most people had to fill space, and now we're having to make space to do anything, to connect, to do lots of things. It's a really great pragmatic read. And one of the things that that he mentioned was, actually, we don't learn from experience. We actually learn from reflecting on experience. That was really helpful for me as a leader, to spend some time just reflecting. And then I learned about bullet journaling, Bujo, which is just creating some time to be, to reflect on how I'm doing as a business leader, as a father, and how am I leading myself, just to have some time of reflection.
Yeah, so stay with us, everyone listening, because we are going to come to the book recommendations. And Gharry, just on that, I would say one of the best things I bought 2 years ago was One Line a Day, and effectively in it you sort of have for each year you have a line, and you can it's literally like a paragraph for that day. And I love it because it makes me, I have to distill about 2-3 minutes just distilling what is important to me to capture about that day. And then reading back last year, by the way, it's very hot last year this time. We were all outdoors, all enjoying ourselves as I was reading back in my diary the other day. Dom, just talk to us a little bit about this time issue, because when you and I go in, and again, we're coaching leaders, the number of times it's come up as the issue where leaders go, I've just got no space. And therefore that's holding me back. What would you say to everyone listening? How do they help their leaders or help themselves deal with that?
Well, I think first of all, it's to give leaders permission to even talk about it, because many of them feel it's a failing, or they're going to be marked down for even acknowledging the fact they're pushed for time. So that's the first thing, giving them time, the opportunity to do that. I think the second thing about time is to really just help them understand exactly how they're allocating the time and where it's going and what use they're having of it. But the biggest important thing, I think, is getting them to understand why they're feeling the way they are about time. Because we often find with leaders, they'll come in saying, we've got no time at all. And when you actually sit them down, help them think through where their time's going, they realize it's more a perception, perhaps, than reality. They're busy, but there's always scope to make some sort of adjustments and change and build something in. I guess the last thing is they have to be persuaded of the benefits of allocating their time to thinking about their emotions and equipping themselves. And if they don't see the benefits, they're not going to do it.
Yeah. And I always, just on that, we always say to leaders, you know that person who you've been dealing with, who you're not getting on with, like, how much time do you spend, on it? Whereas if you could find a way actually to deal with that, and often it's through their own emotional intelligence, you'd flow through much better. But toxicity of emotions can slow you down so much. I'm sure we've all experienced on the panel. We got about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to just do the final question that Philip's asked, because I always want to include people who've joined, and then we're going to do book recommendations that we really encourage you to get hold of. So Philip says, it is our responsibility to develop and mentor our leaders the way we want them to lead our teams. High EQ leaders, to support them is key to building the best teams. Leaders to build the right environment, as you've all said a number of times, to allow, to be open to allow creativity. I agree with Gharry, you need to ask the right questions. And so I kind of just wanted to be a bit naughty and put you on the spot a little bit. And I'm going to go to Dom first, because I give you two a bit more time. What's a great question that you ask leaders when you're trying to develop them or grow them or help them with their awareness or emotional intelligence?
I think I'd say, what leaders do what you want to do well. Because we know that one of the great ways of building your self-efficacy is to model, is to learn from other people. And so a great starting point to say, look, you've got this idea about what you want to do. Where have you seen it in action? Who's doing it? What are they applying? What skills do they use? And then that roots it and also gives them a roadmap of the sort of things they need to develop. So I'd start with that.
Fantastic. Any thoughts from either? I know I put you on the spot a little bit. Any great questions that?
Well, not a great question, but one that I would always start with, and that is like, how are they feeling? Because quite often leaders are not asked what they, how they're doing and what's going on for them. So that importance of sort of checking in with someone, that in itself helps them think, well, okay, that's not, someone's asking me, maybe I should be asking as well, so for me that's really important, that whole check-in piece.
Thanks, Christina.
Okay, well, I've had a bit longer to think about it, so one of the questions I ask is, what's the question behind your question?
Yeah, that's important.
My manufacturing colleagues have got when they try to get to a problem, they've got the why. They do about 7 whys to get to a root cause. It drives you nuts, but they really get there. So I try to find out what's the question behind the question, or alternatively, that's looking introspectively. The one is, what's the outcome you want?
Yeah, that's a good one.
What's the outcome you want? So focus on outcomes rather than just ideas.
But why?
Very good.
I know I'm going to get another 7 whys, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah, and just for me, just for what it's worth, when we're often coaching leaders and we get to the root of what's going on, one of the things I'll always say to them is, who would you be without this thought? And because sometimes they've got a dominant thought that has just kind of been with them too long, really. It's like, who would you be without this thought? And it's amazing when you watch their faces kind of light up and go, wow, I'd be such a nice person, or I'd be such a better leader. You're like, well, let go. It's just a thought. Okay, we said to everyone, we're going to give you book reviews, and Lucy's going to come back on in a moment to lead us into land. But let's do book reviews. So Gharry, take us through yours first, because you've already revealed, but just remind us. Yeah,
The Fearless Organization. She's a Harvard business professor, for those that like that kind of endorsement. It's a really good read. It's a really good read.
Fantastic.
It's a bit worthy, but it's worth it.
I'm going to come to Dom next.
Okay, mine is We Are All Leaders by Frederick Arcanda, which is basically saying that every one of us, it's a mindset. It's like we were saying earlier, every one of us can act like a leader, and there are 100 great tips to do it. I think a very practical, useful book.
Fantastic. Christina?
Well, it made me chuckle a bit earlier. You mentioned Goldman, because one of my ex-colleagues that I did one of my leadership programs with is actually on the distribution. So yeah, that will have triggered something in his mind as well. For me, I haven't got the book with me because all my books are actually in boxes, having moved house recently. But one that resonates, well, there's 2 actually. One is, and because I really like stories, and I like to really sort of be gripped. I read a lot of stuff at work, so I like to be gripped by it. But the Sheryl Sandberg, COO of Facebook, the Lean In. So for all the female and actually male leaders on this, is really worth a listen, because it's about feeling that a connection and being able to put yourself out there and really sort of be the person to ask the question. Don't sort of sit back and wait and worry about what the room is thinking. So just having that confidence, really. So that really helped me, and I've been recommending that for a couple of years. But the other one is that I like watching his podcast, actually, is Simon Sinek. I love the sort of concept around the sort of why, what, how, and I really think it's really simple and helps leaders connect strategy with people and the sort of the holistic organization thing. So yeah, Simon Sinek, anything by him is great.
Well, you stole mine there, which is going to be Leaders Eat Last, because I think that's by Simon Sinek. I think it's very, very good. I haven't got it because I listened to it on this, but and I'm going to recommend, just really briefly, Awareness by Anthony DeMello, who's a monk, but I found that he really helped me sort of go through some meditations to learn how to become more aware of what was going on in me, both in my mind and in my emotions. So I just want to say a massive thank you to my panelists, to Gharry, to Christina, to Dom. As always, really, really appreciated your thoughts, your ideas, and your commentary. So thank you for joining us and giving up your time. Really do appreciate that. And I'm going to hand back to Lucy, and also to say thank you to everyone who's attended. There's been a great number of people on, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks guys, and thanks everyone for being so interactive. You've asked some great questions. If you do go away and reflect and do have a question for our panel, please email it to me and I can put that forward for you. We will be sending out the recording, so that will come to you later today. I'll also send out these book recommendations and keep your eyes peeled for our future webinars. So thanks again everyone, have a great afternoon.